The Gongfu Crew podcast, bringing together practitioners of various styles and schools and their unique perspectives to explore the world of Chinese martial arts. Welcome to the next episode of the Gongfu Crew podcast. Now, the style that we will be focusing on today is Xinyi Liuhequan, or Mind and Heart Six Harmony Boxing. It's quite a mouthful, but it's a very interesting style. It comes from the Muslim communities of Henan province, and it is probably the origin of many of the later Xinyi and Xinyiquan variations, and as such has a pretty long documented history. It might also have been connected to the development of Chen-style Taijiquan. My guest is Derek Notman from Massachusetts, who has a lot of experience practicing and teaching that specific method, which will be what, like I said, will we focus on. And I hope that you found the interview as insightful as I did, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Gongfu Crew podcast and to the new episode with Derek Notman, who I actually know from a few years back, because I joined a couple of virtual classes on Xinyi Liuhequan, which will also be a main focus of our talk. But welcome here, Derek, and maybe you want to share a few words or say a little bit about yourself, say something about yourself so that people know who I'm talking to.
Sure. Hello, and thank you for having me. My name is Derek Notman. I am from the United States. I've been involved in Chinese martial arts for over 30 years. I got into all this through an interest in philosophy and Taoism and looking for an integrated system of thinking, healing, self-defense. You know, the whole Chinese concept of five excellences really appealed to me. And I spent a lot of my life when I was younger just trying to find people to train with and study with. Now, I'm 53, so back in the day, it was not easy. You know, it was before everybody went to China and everybody went to Thailand and all that. I started out with jiu-jitsu and boxing and all kinds of different stuff, but I was always most interested in the Chinese arts because of the philosophical and the, I guess you could say esoteric, but the deeper possibility that it pointed at other than just self-defense. And so that was always, for some reason, interesting to me, the idea of self-cultivation and enlightenment and all that. So that really directed me toward the Chinese arts. Wing Chun was the first Chinese art that I trained, and I had a really wonderful sort of deep apprenticeship with a guy in that out in Portland, Oregon, back in the 90s, guy named Clyde Alvarado, who was a good practitioner of Wing Chun and Filipino arts. And after that, I started studying. I spent some time with James McNeil and learned Xingyi and some Chen Tai Chi through him. And then I hooked up with Xie Pei Qi and He Jinbao and that crew out of Beijing, and I started studying Yin-style Bagua. Probably spent, 12, 15 years mostly practicing that. I would go to Beijing and study with those guys, come see them in the States. And so that was great because Xie Pei Qi was like Yoda. He was just a super cool old guy that was, had incredible vigor and strength and was a really funny character. So that was neat to be around all that. And it was a good introduction to what's possible in these arts. You know, he'd do things like his gray hair would get dark again because he'd be patting his head, or, he was always smoking and drinking and missing all his teeth. He was just a classic old school character. So that was a good practice for me. It's a huge art, so it was like overwhelming. You have 8 animals, each has 7 different hands, and that's 56 times. My brain doesn't work that way, but it was a huge expanse of material. I wound up moving to Asia for a few years, living in Thailand, did a little bit of Muay Thai, but was mostly training Bagua at the time. I'd already been studying that for a long time. And then, I moved back to the States, was living in Boston, and I got introduced to my Xinyi Liuhequan teacher, Shui Sheng Peng, just through a connection who knew I was interested in Xinyi Liuhe. He knew Peng had just moved here from Shanghai, and so that was a beautiful thing. We, basically Peng and I trained together every morning for a few years, and I had some foundation, and but it didn't take me long to realize that I didn't understand what I was doing. Just his physical body and what he was teaching me, I just couldn't do it. And so I had to make a decision to sort of throw everything out and start over. And it was a great thing to be confronted with, because it really put me on that mindset of not knowing, and when I was younger, I could never get good fast enough. I wanted to be the guy who knew. I wanted to be the teacher. It's just what it was. And so I was in my own way. And so in a lot of ways, the starting over was profoundly liberating. And Xinyi Liuhe is I like to say Xinyi Liuhe is a short, direct path up the mountain. It's a hard climb, but it's quick comparatively, because the shapes are just so demanding. And, sort of the idea in Xinyi is like yoga. You bind to liberate. So the idea in Xinyi is we make the body into like a fist. Everything comes together. And through that, the absence of the creation of shape and intent, the body really releases. So each time we're creating a shape, we're engaging. Each time we're releasing, we're releasing. And that binary softens and opens the body over time. The challenge is because we're working with tissue in the physical body, it takes years to really change the body. So everybody is quite often looking for a quick result where there isn't one. And so, anyway, so I've done a lot of work in the healing and wellness space. So when I was in Boston, I had a healing arts practice right in downtown for many years, which allowed me free mornings to meet with Peng and train. And so that was a beautiful experience and relationship. And since then, I keep working with Xinyi, but I also have studied some Gao style Baguazhang and Yang style Tai Chi with a guy named Yang Yusen, who's one of the best practitioners I've ever seen. He's beautiful to watch. So I sort of bounce between the three arts, but I would say that everything I understand comes out of Xinyi. And also I would say that the way that I understand Xinyi is it's the mother art of the other two. Like you can find everything that's in Tai Chi and Bagua in Xinyi in a different name and iteration and a different flavor of expression. But, I'm a believer that really the classic idea of the body is the hand, and you have to be able to close the whole thing in harmony and open the whole thing. Kai and He, it's kind of that simple. But simple done well is profound.
Well, I mean, Xinyi Liuhe definitely has seems to have the longest history as well. You can trace it back the furthest. So there's a lot of stuff that I would like to dive into deeper. But maybe because you mentioned right at the beginning, you said, oh, you got interested in Chinese martial arts also because of this wholeness or the different aspects and elements of it. How would you define, like if somebody asks you, okay, what is a martial art, or what does a training method have to have for you to call it a martial art?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, the whole martial distinction is kind of ridiculous, especially at this day and age. If you're really interested in fighting, go to an MMA gym. No question. Get it out of your system. Then come back and appreciate the deeper aspects that are available through these things. Because if you have a doubt the whole time, if you never do it, but you're training a martial art, but you never fight, it doesn't make any sense, you know? So then what you do is you don't really know if you know. And so then you get a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? The viciousness of somebody who's insecure. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not real. For me, I also grew up playing ice hockey. And I grew up around an area of fishermen. So I knew guys when I was a kid that could fight, and it wasn't because they were martial artists. They were just tough and mean and hard, So to me, the martial piece provides and even here, I'm not speaking about fighting so much as the feedback you can get from proper training can provide a physical response that allows you to develop something that's real, and not just in theory, And so, I mean, again, just to qualify that, because it's kind of contradictory, the difference is that if you're never experiencing force put back on your body, your shapes, you don't know if they're really real, right? A lot of people in yoga, you see it, they're making the shape, but there's no inner connection. There's nothing really happening. So martial art can give you that feedback without the fighting. And that's useful to get stronger and healthier. And then maybe put yourself in a body that if you wanted to test the fighting piece, you could do so with some possibility, right? A lot of people, my general observation of Chinese martial arts is people are weak. They don't train very hard, and they haven't really gotten strong in the body. The release and the ease comes from having developed the strength and then giving it up.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I find it interesting when you look at how many of the great masters, that everybody looks up to, how they learned or how they trained, or even how they taught. In many cases, it seems to have been like, okay, so I only teach people who already know how to fight. People who train some basic stuff or wrestling or whatever, and said, okay, so you understand the basics, so now let's go in deeper. So it makes sense that you say actually it could be interesting, to have the basic experience, and then you go into these maybe more complex training methods and
there has to be something there to work with. If you haven't put together the raw material of the physicality, whether it's just the strength or the willingness to get in there and get roughed up, right? A lot of people, and to some sense this was true for me too, right? Anybody that gets interested in fighting is coming from some degree of insecurity about being safe in the world. There's some fear around all that, and that's fair enough. Not a problem. The idea that you're going to learn something intellectually that you're going to use physically to keep yourself safe and be tougher, it's just wrong. And so a lot of people want to look at this fighting and be deadly, but they're just not even physical. And so I think the Chinese martial arts in particular, because there is such a beautiful philosophical and spiritual component there, which is very real and very useful and beautiful, they can be attracted to that and then not want to put in the hard work that's behind that. And so, I was really lucky in that my Xinyi Liuhequan teacher, and I'll say Xinyi Liuhequan, as it was taught to me, is what my teacher called hanjin, which is like it's an angry energy. Like he'd have me, there'd be a tree 100 yards away, and I'd be walking in the rooster step between two trees, and he'd be like, you're walking through that fucking tree. Like that's your mindset. It's like I'm going through whatever gets in front of me. And that's really useful to get where you're trying to go, but it's not a great mind state to live in because it's intense. Xinyi Liuhequan is a development. I'd say that the art in the beginning is all about stepping, and later it's all about standing. It changes, but it changes based on how you've changed, right? It's not like, okay, now you do this. It's organic. There's a recognition of what's really at work here, and your practice will minimize quite naturally in a sense. But basically, yes, you have this real physical critical mass that gets hit, that integrates the body. The way I think of it, you have to first thing is unify the three sections of the body. So I have all these, because I'm interested in philosophy, or at least I'm just wired that way, number and principle, classical education model, all these things, because I read, Plato and all this. It's a structure. It's a way of working with things. And to me, that's inherent in Chinese martial arts. The numerology is everywhere. The idea of trivium and quadrivium are all throughout it. And so Xinyi is a aggressive kind of a mindset. My teacher was a very sweet guy who never brought up martial art. I didn't learn a lot of technique and fighting stuff from him. I'd done all that 15 years, 20 years prior to even meeting him. He was really into the exercise and health aspect, and he was a very generous, kind person, which was really nice to see coming out of that tradition. But he was a brick shithouse. I was kind of like, what are you going to do to him? He was wicked strong, compact, and so to me, that's what Gongfu does, is it just makes you so you're going to be hard to deal with. And I don't think we can really be much more than that.
Was that also, because you mentioned that, you had done a lot of other training before you met your Xinyi Liuhequan teacher, and you said you mentioned before that you realized, oh, actually, I didn't really understand what I was doing up until then. But now you also mentioned this physicality. Was that one of the things that drew you to his teachings, also to see like, oh, okay, so he's really like strong and stable and all of that?
Yeah, that's what made me realize I was living in a glass house, was that his physicality was just so much more developed, and I could see that it was from the practice. And so it was like, and I think back on that now in a sense, like Xie Peiqi was a great practitioner and a great teacher. So it wasn't that I didn't know all these things. I'd heard everything. I'd heard all the classical stuff. I'd trained in a classical system. I just didn't understand it because I hadn't gone deep enough physically to have changes happen that I could then register and keep building on. It's a little bit like a trail of breadcrumbs. And when I think back on why that was, there's a few things. One, I just didn't work hard enough. I didn't know how at that point, and I just wasn't ripe, if you will. But the other was, in Yin style Bagua, I was practicing 100 different hands, 100 different things. Xinyi Liuhequan, it's just one thing over and over. There's no form. There's just a single action done over and over. And my teacher, he taught me rooster step, which is really no action to it. It's just stepping. You don't use the hands at all. And I did that for 3 months, only that, just stepping, because that was what it was. I was willing to do that because I'd been around Chinese Gongfu long enough. I'd invested enough in it, and I wanted what was at the end of the road, And so I think that there are 3 things that are necessary. One is a profound desire, because it takes time and a lot of work. The other is a method that you can learn, so you're not just randomly using your body. And the third is a teacher who has it embodied, so you can feel it, you can see what it is. Otherwise, it's an abstraction. And I know for me, prior to meeting my Xinyi Liuhequan teacher, it was all abstraction. I was doing the stuff, I was training, but the mind and the body were not integrated. And so that critical mass, when it gets reached, then you become beyond the need of a teacher in a sense. You learn how to learn. And so like I can watch a video and I can do what that's doing because my body knows how to make shapes. I've been doing this a long time. Or as you get better at martial arts, you can go spend an hour with somebody and get so much out of it because you're in a position to actually learn and absorb and embody what's being shown. But until you are, it doesn't matter how much of that you do. It doesn't show up in your own capacity.
So you mentioned I like this three-pronged approach, or the 3 basic elements. Let's talk about the method. I mean, when you did start learning Xinyi Liuhequan, you already mentioned that, okay, so this rooster stepping or chicken stepping. So that was one thing. But how would your teacher approach teaching you? What would that look like?
Yeah, that's great. So he didn't speak a lot of English, and I don't speak a lot of Chinese. So it was a lot of hands-on, a lot of putting me into the shape. But, he would always say to me, he said, you have foundation. So this is good. For him as a teacher, and I can empathize with this, having been teaching myself. If somebody comes in and they already can do some of the stuff, it just makes it so much easier, And I had the hunger for it, So he would show me by doing the exercise, classical Chinese, start saying some song in his head that is what defines the exercise, show me each one of the little bits, and then just have me do it. So and he'd be on me, lower and longer constantly. I'd be drenched in sweat, when we were first started training. So the process was, at first I learned the rooster step. I only did that until the rooster step creates an asymmetrical, isometric contraction in the body that connects it solidifies the pelvis so you can sink the chi and connect to the earth. Because in Xingyi, we have this saying, rooster legs, dragon waist, bear back, tiger head embrace, eagle claw. That is the, what do you call these things? Hieromorphic image, which is different components of an animal. It's also the order of creation. So when you get the rooster legs, you've stabilized the pelvis. Once the pelvis is stable and down, then the waist can be separated from the pelvis. So then you have dragon waist. when the waist begins to wake up, it starts to wake up all the muscles in the back from all the rotation and holding up. So then you get the bare back. Once you get that, then you get the tiger head embrace, because the shoulders get subsumed into the back. The shoulders problem gets solved. Then you get the eagle claw, because the strength from the back goes all the way out to the ends of the hands. So it's like it's a recipe. And so to make that recipe happen, you have to hit each stage. And so the first one is in that rooster shape. So in my experience in teaching this, people don't put enough into that, and they don't go low enough and long enough to build that lower base and strength and pelvic floor and the psoas. I mean, there's so much integral physiological architecture that's getting strengthened through that to then move on to the next shapes. And so it's really, that's what it is. It's like you need $100 to buy something. If you've only got 70, you got to keep going until you get the $100.
Yeah,
and this is, this is how that works. And so my learning with him in general, it was very slow at first, but then once my body had changed, you know, so like I do the rooster step for a while. Then the next shape he taught me, I believe was lungin, which is another form of rooster. So here's the theory: is you have rooster shape strengthens the walking and begins the changing of the body. Lungin is a vertical circle. And then Lung Diao Ban, dragon hangs his wrist, is a horizontal circle. And then you have Yao San Ba, these are the sort of three traditional exercises, is a diagonal. So those three plus the rooster is stabilizing the body and opening it up to the three planes of motion. Everything else is derivative of that to a certain extent.
That's very interesting, because a lot of the stuff that you mentioned actually resonated with me. And I mean, I'm training Chen style Tai Chi. I don't have that much exposure to Xinyi Liuhe, but also this, that you don't want to use your hips to turn. Like, this is what beginners always do. They always, whenever they try to generate turning power, they use the hips, and then they lose their stability, because the feet also have to move. That's and right. The separation of hips and waist, that is a core component, was really interesting.
Yeah, that's right. So for us, the first thing you have to do is move the waist without moving the hips. And then you differentiate. And then later on, you don't even think about it. But at first, you have to actively inhibit certain movement. Part of the problem in Chinese martial arts is everybody thinks, oh, I'm moving my whole body, and everybody wiggles around. Yeah. But it's not that. It's the opposite of that, actually. So anyway, once I sort of went through the crucible of learning how to learn the shapes, and my body became developed and more responsive, you know, at first I might learn a shape and I'd work on it for a month or a couple months, but then down the road I'd learn 3 in a day once I could do it. You know what I mean? So it's like it's slow at first and then it's fast.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so you mentioned shapes. How would you describe, like, what is a shape to you? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Xinyi Liuhe, we have the 10 big shapes. Xie Da Xing is how it's also known. To me, 10 is a number of multiplicity, right? The 10,000 things. So I hear that as meaning just making shapes. We have 10 because we need a number, but once you learn how to make shapes, you can make shapes. And so what I mean by that is the shape is the object of the meditation, because it's what your intention is. It's how you are directing and organizing your body, is through the requirements of that particular shape. In doing that and maintaining that intention, you are bringing your awareness back onto your body and developing your awareness so that your awareness is following your intention. And this is the same thing as sitting meditation. Each time your mind wanders off, you bring it back to the posture, which is your intention. And so it's the same process. We develop mindfulness by bringing our awareness back to ourselves. And the unique thing about Gongfu, as I see it, and my experience of it, is that then saturates the body with mind and awareness. And that first stage takes time, because most people are so fucking abstracted. We're all lost out there. It's the nature of it. And so this turning around and regaining the ground of the body by saturating it with awareness through focused intent is how we really start to get these deeper tissues and get everything to begin to release. That releasing returns us to resting at emptiness. This is why emptiness is what's talked about all the time in these arts, because if you look at where you really are, there's nothing there. We are meeting the world from our central emptiness.
But when you say posture, because you mentioned like there's a certain posture, but in Xinyi Liuhe, it's mostly in movement, right? You don't have, like in the beginning, you're not really standing.
Yeah, but each shape is a posture. So you're moving, but you're moving in that posture. So there's a lot of internal engagement that's going on that's sort of almost held, or rigid's the wrong word, but it's fixed. And then you're learning to move with that without letting it all fall away.
Right. So it's a little bit like, I mean, we do have a lot of that in Chin style as well, these kind of contradicting requirements.
That's
like
right.
You want to have the posture, but you also want to be able to move, and that teaches you to be able to move while adhering to certain principles of posture.
And this is totally unqualified. This is just me saying what I think. But you study with Nabil, is that right? You're that? Yeah. So when I look at your guys' Chen style, I love it because I see everything that I see in Xinyi Liuhe, the way the body works, the look, the tendon, the connection, all that. When I started training the Bagua and Tai Chi, and that was, I'd been with my Xinyi Liuhe teacher for, 12 years, 15 years, something like that. I had moved away. And so I started studying and going in another direction just because I like to train. And what is my point? Oh, yeah. So when I met my teacher, Yusen, it's all the same. His Bagua, his Tai Chi is just like the Xinyi in terms of the tendon method and the way you're using the body. So the shapes are different, but what you're doing, this directed opposition, this recognition of how to embody these contradictory things, such as reaching through the fullness of your body and then releasing away from the edges. So this is why, for me, I do think there's more unifying these things in terms of, again, think about gold as a substance. You can make it into any shape you want once you have the substance. And so training makes our body the substance, and then the shapes are just, have you learned how to make that shape or not?
So you talked about the beginning stages of Xinyi Liuhe. You said it speeds up once you have that basic understanding, like physical understanding. Is there a larger curriculum? Because some Chinese styles are super expansive in terms of, so many like forms and exercises and weapons and whatever.
Yeah.
Is that in Xinyi Liuhe as well, or does it stay this kind of minimalistic training?
Well, so it's a little of both, so my understanding is this, and I'm not I'm not trying to be Chinese. I don't speak Chinese. I'm not trying to pass on an exact curriculum. That's not really my disposition or interest, right? I learned from my teacher as I understand it. And again, communication is a barrier because of the language stuff. So we can communicate at a certain level, but I can't get into real detailed kind of questioning. Our art, which comes down from Lu Songgao, has 36 basic shapes to it. That's the curriculum. Within that, you could go, it's like the Yin style Bagua curriculum was huge only because you can keep making distinctions. You know what I mean? So at a certain point, the curriculum is whatever you want it to be, depending on how many distinctions you want to count.
Yeah.
But the basic piece in Xinyi is small and simple. This is the other thing. It's like I could show you everything in 2 minutes, but you wouldn't be able to do any of it the way it's supposed to be done. But like each shape in Xinyi Liuhe is just one basic movement over and over. And because of that, the external form that you're learning or copying is very simple. To do it with the requirements is very hard because it's physically demanding and challenging, and you have to maintain that awareness while you're doing the movement, while you're doing the line. So it's a small, concentrated system. And I like that because and even my practice now, right? And so this is the other half of that question. What your practice becomes down the road, at least in my experience, varies. I don't go through the whole thing. I've got a few favorite shapes. I've got a few favorite Bagua shapes. I do the beginning of the Tai Chi La, and I can go more in any one of those directions if I wanted to. But what I'm always working on is the quality with which I'm doing whatever thing it is that I'm doing. And there is a consistency there, meaning it's always engaging through the whole body. It's always getting out to the ends. It's always releasing from periphery to center, from center to periphery. It's finding those qualities of good movement and release in whatever particular shape or sequence that you're playing with. So to answer your question directly, Xinyi is a small, dense thing that can expand out if you wanted it to, but it also falls away. Like I don't do rooster step much anymore. I don't need to. I already did it. I got what was there to get from that. And now I'm using that to work in different ways. And so my Xinyi practice is a lot more standing and single action. I don't do a lot of line stepping anymore. But I think it's necessary in the beginning.
Yeah, makes sense. Was there, I mean, you said that you didn't learn a lot of techniques from your teacher. Was there any partner training specifically that you did with him? Is this a big part of Xinyi Liuhe, or is it really focused on the solo training, on the power generation and all of that?
It's more focused on solo training. At the same time, there's body banging exercises. So my teacher and I would smash into each other and do all those kind of choreographed stepping patterns where you're hitting your waist. We use trees to bang into as well. So there's a lot of ancillary practices, again, depending on what you want to develop, depending on how you're going to use it, so I learned a lot of that stuff. I don't do any of it anymore. It's just not interesting to me. I don't have the time. And I'm not trying to make my body indestructible. I mean, a big thing with especially Chinese martial arts is people have an immortality project. They think they're going to live forever. And it's that doesn't interest me. And I also think it's a misunderstanding of the possibility.
It was featured in, I mean, I studied sinology. It came up like all the time, and like scholars and everybody was fascinated with this idea. Some people had interesting interpretations, like drinking quicksilver, like mercury, would make you immortal. And
but
maybe
it still exists today. Look at Instagram. Everybody, so I mean, Chinese had that culturally, but everybody has that a little bit because, they haven't come to terms with it, which is fine. I'm just saying so for me, the idea of making myself indestructible through those kind of practices, and there are people that go that road in Kung Fu, and that's great if you like it, but not my interest.
It's a part of many traditions.
Yeah, and to me, one of the interesting things about Xinyi Liuhe, and I can remember this when I first encountered it, was like, how do you use that? Like, how do these exercises translate into application? And what my teacher would always say is, you fight. You just fight. You don't try to do a particular thing. He'd say the exercises transform your body, and then you're strong and you're balanced and you're quick and you're agile, and that's difficult to fight. And so like, I don't know. I mean, if you've seen or been around fights and violence, it's not intricate. It's not a big exchange. It's sudden, it's abrupt, and it usually ends with who's got more power and who's angrier, in a certain sense. And so I think the real value in Xinyi from that standpoint is the intensity with which you have to do the shapes in the practice to bring about the transmutation is an ability to dial in like that. It is an aggressive thing. And the body that gets created being very relaxed and supple and agile is a hard thing to deal with. And so it's this combination of being able to be very watery and soft, but also to be able to become very focused, So, I'm a big believer that the whole thing is around transforming the tissues to create an unusual type of mobility and strength that gives you the element of surprise if somebody that's uninformed just were to try to grab you or, what have you. And that's very useful in a real world context. As soon as you get into a cage and we're in an agreed fight, then everything changes. There's horses for courses, as they like to say.
Yeah, it's a different context. So you mentioned this kind of like body hardening or conditioning, these ideas. Are there also elements that, I mean, obviously the entire training curriculum, from what I understand, is essentially also a form of strength training, but it maybe not in a conventional sense, or maybe most people wouldn't recognize it as such. Are there exercises though with weights or something specific, as part of Xinyi Liuhe that you would also do, like, I don't know, like a big spear or some styles to use that for?
It's a great question. The traditional weapons training, heavy weapons, I think, is a part of all the arts. So it is in Xinyi. But I would say more to the point, and what's unique and very interesting is the method of strength development in Xinyi, and I would say Chinese Gongfu done well. What makes it special is that you're learning to use the mind to load the body. So as soon as I have an outside object, it's not me generating it. I'm in response to that object. But if I can, with my yi, imagine, so a classic idea that is in a lot of the different shapes of Xinyi Liuhe is lifting a heavy stone. And it is a shape, but it's more of an idea. And so my ability to really make this heavy and have my whole body convinced and organized and acting like I'm holding something very heavy here is generated through my own nervous system and ability to hold my body in a state of dynamic, contracted strength, if you will, that is even. It's not like I'm just in my arms. I am always spreading and distributing the workload of any shape evenly throughout the whole frame, the way a drum is stretched across its frame. So that way all the tissue is being pulled at evenly, and that's what you're sensing. That's where your mind and intention and awareness are. And so the ability to do that over and over changes the tissues, strengthens the tissues, and enhances the skill and ability. So Xinyi is like this. Each movement, bang, bang, open, close, open, close. It ends, it finishes, it finishes, it finishes. So it's got a different feeling than the continuity that you can find in Tai Chi and Bagua. But because of that percussive nature, it's very clear and it's simpler, because transitioning changes, unless you've built those shapes properly, is really hard.
Yeah. This seems to be a big misunderstanding, at least in I don't know how it is in China, but in Europe and North America, when you think about these internal martial arts, that they are kind of arbitrary. But then when you actually learn from someone who really understands it, actually super specific, like you said, with the shapes, like it's like, no, it has to be like this because there's a very specific intent in this, and that actually creates the training benefit.
That's right, because a shape is just a crucible, and it's also active. So every time I make a shape, I'm working with energy, not energy woo-woo out there, the energy of being in that position and how much it agitates the body is like, that's an energy, that agitation, that difficulty. And then harmonizing with that is how you're transforming things. So the creation of the shape is really about the pressure that you create through the restrictions that make the shape. And without those restrictions, without those constraints, if you will, there's no pressure buildup, and so there's no change.
Yeah, interesting. Now, for me, when we talk about strength training, for me, a natural it's a natural segue to also talk more about health, because I mean, conditioning, like when you talk about this body hardening stuff or toughening up the body, that can also have a kind of an adverse effect on health if you do it the improper way. But what I find interesting is that a lot of people talk about health, and then when you say, hey, it's also strength training, for some people it's like, oh, but I wanted to train for health. I thought, yeah, but how is that the opposite? I mean, like, that's strength is the first thing that you lose when you get old. So I mean, it's like,
that's right. It actually was I think he was German, a very famous strongman named George Hackenschmidt, who said strength should never be divorced from health. And it's true. To be strong, to be healthy, is to have a degree of strength. And so I guess to me, the distinction is the type of strength. In Chinese Gongfu, everything comes from a softness and elasticity, a capacity to absorb and receive. It's not a keeping something out there and using my muscle to manage it. It's about a joining and receiving and being able to unbalance in a sense. And so, yeah, Xinyi Liuhe, well, I would step back and I would say this, that health is a function of circulation, whether it's an economy, a road system, or a human body. No circulation, no health, right? Things need to move. The whole point of Xingyi, for sure, and these other arts, I would say it's in there too, is that you are getting the blood and qi out to the end points. And that is about circulation. And so each time you are developing your strength, and your strength is really just a function of your blood and qi getting to the ends, there's a fullness that develops, and this is where this stuff gets a little bit weird. And again, you have to separate it from the martial piece. But like the demonstrable body quality that I look for in a teacher is that somebody has energy at their hands. Like I can just make them lose balance and move just by touch, because there's a fullness here. That fullness displaces. It's not magic. It's not anything other than, one object moving another object, but it's a function of, there's like a leading edge. Do you know what I'm talking about here? Have you experienced this? The peng quality in Tai Chi,
right.
For instance.
Yeah.
There's a fullness there. To me, that's a result of the healthiness of the tissue, that everything is full of blood and qi. And that is because you've created the capacity or the conditions for that to happen by opening up the body, getting the blood moving around. That invigorates the body. That creates your tissue quality can be felt. So it's not a mystery. If somebody's really tight and thin in their tissue, they're not going to have a lot of capacity to receive and release.
Yeah, and what I notice is that the one of the things that a lot of people are it's highly sought after, the ability to have a lot of effect with small movements, like or very little movement. I noticed that, you can teach that little movement, but usually there's nothing behind it because it also lacks this coordination in the body. But when somebody has it, it is actually like outwardly, there's not much happening, but the entire body structure is shifting and changing. And suddenly you can feel all of that, essentially the entire body behind it.
That's right. So internal martial arts, I like the definition that it means that I'm moving within the space of my body itself rather than just moving my body through space.
Yeah.
You are using the bony structures to create stretches through the tissue through small little movements of like semi-foundational joints. And that is the internal movement. It doesn't need to be a big movement. And, this is why I say you have to separate it from fighting. For me, that's a very interesting and useful study because of the healing effects. And at the same time, it's also useful in application of martial art, but only if the person's body has been transformed. And then what you're really seeing is somebody that it doesn't matter what they do, they've got power behind it. And it's not because they're doing something, it's because they are that someone.
Yeah. Would you say that if you would it be possible to properly train Xinyi Liuhequan and not have beneficial health effect? Like if it's...
Well, this is the rub. No, I think no matter how you trained it, you would get some beneficial health effect because it's just fundamental that you're stepping in the beginning, you're getting exercise. It's hard work. For me, one of the things, and hopefully in this new year, I'll get a chance to do more of this. I've had a busy few years, so I've sort of stepped back. But I think Xinyi Liuhe for people that are athletes and strong is an amazing art because it's such a challenge. Like I've never seen anybody that can do the rooster step. The rooster step will just make you want to quit right away. And so it is a very physical practice. So you're going to get the health and strength benefits at a basic level just from doing it, even if you're doing it wrong. But why do it wrong? Because the real value is in the long-term longitudinal practice. I mean, the thing about Chinese Gongfu is it takes 10 years, 20 years. It's like if you hear that and you're put off, you're never going to get it, because and it's not like there's nothing happening until 10 or 20 years. It's good all the way. It's just that it really takes time. I mean, at least for me, it has. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I can think about the changes in the experience of being me and how I relate to and feel my body. And it's so profound. It's such a world away from what it used to be. And I'm 53 and I'm comfortable, I'm healthy, I'm strong. So it's like, those are the benefits that I put the work in for, is to be clear, calm, and comfortable. That's what I'm after.
Now, you mentioned a lot of elements that I would describe also, because, I mean, you said it in the beginning, Chinese martial arts, they do have a connection both to philosophy, but also to spiritual practice, to mindfulness, to all of these elements. We did talk a little bit about this already before we started taping, but are there specific aspects or elements in Xinyi Liuhe where we would say, oh yeah, this is kind of the mindfulness training, or is it just that it's always there when you train it, or is it something different? How would you describe this?
Yeah, well, it should be always there. So for me, mindfulness is another word that's been co-opted by the world of, everything means everything. Mindfulness is specific. The Buddha defined mindfulness as observing the mind's attention as it moves from one object of observation or attention to another. So in Xinyi Liuhe, the mindfulness is that your shape is correct, that you don't lose your ding, that you have the he, that all the ideas that go into creating oppositional force to open and connect the body are present during your practice. And that is a function of your ability to stay with the felt sense of the body. And this is what we're strengthening. The mind becomes quiet because the mind has something to tend to, and it's the shape, it's the body. And so you are learning to always operate from that space in a sense. And so there is the paradox is you have to be released into yourself, but you have to be reaching out through yourself. You have to be relaxed, but you have to be alert. It's like we're trying to bring together, this is where, for me, this is part of what interests me philosophically. Tai Chi, and I use Tai Chi as a default a lot just because of the philosophical clarity of the idea. Tai Chi is simply recognizing that the world is a world of duality and opposites. And to find the center, you have to know the ends. So we embrace the paradox of duality, and we harmonize it through the Trinity, through recognizing the middle point. And so that is a type of awareness that develops, and you're learning to develop it by learning to pay attention to yourself. First, your physical body. But then as that changes, you begin to notice more subtle energy in body, the movement of mind, the emotional flavor of an experience. These things can only really be discerned if we've created a space from which to observe them, which is why we have to transform the body and its tissues so that the nervous system releases, the mind quiets down, and then we can hear the subtler conversations that are happening.
Now, there was one thing that you mentioned this before we started taping, and I thought it was really interesting. You said that back when you trained, you're still training, obviously, but when you were still learning a lot about like Chinese martial arts, you had this idea that like, if I just practice enough Kung Fu, then everything will fall in place. And then later on, you actually realized, actually, no, that's not really true. Like specific aspects of, I don't know, health maintenance, but also, mindfulness training, you still had to learn about that stuff as well, right? As specific.
Yeah, I had this idea because this is how my landscape of my mind works, that, harmony. If I could bring the body into enough of a harmony through practice, that the mental and emotional levels would also be harmonized. And at one level, that's true. But I also went through a period of great depression, and I had to step outside of physical practice and meet myself at an emotional level, at that level, you know. But what fascinates me, or I learned from that, is that the method is the same. And this is what I mean when I say that the terms vary, but the relations stay the same. So because of all my practice, it was very easy for me once I was emotionally ignorant in a certain sense. I just didn't grow up with a lot of that. And so once I realized that and I began to get some sense of that context or landscape, if you will, it was really quick and easy for me to work with it because my physical body was released. And so then it was very easy for me to stay with sensation, because this is what you learn to do. And whether it's the movement of mind or the emotional flavoring of an experience, the same path is always to be unmoved, right? So it's like standing meditation, the way you're doing it is also the same way you're doing your sitting meditation is also, you know, so for me, inquiry is a big part of my life and the work that I do. And what is inquiry? Inquiry is looking at what you're saying and what you mean, because a lot of the time we'll have a word in it is just a concept to us and we don't know what it's pointing at. And so by looking into it, what do you mean by that? You begin to uncover these things. And so like, you know, you've read about Chinese martial arts. Emptiness is everywhere, right? The idea of emptiness is the ultimate attainment. I would say that they don't just mean that as a metaphor or as a thing, it's actual. And so when you really delve into the spiritual journey, when you really begin to look at where you're looking from, what you realize is the elsewhereness of your appearance. I've only ever seen myself over there, and that guy's looking that way. Where I'm looking from is empty. It's open. And so that is a truth to be embodied. But to embody that is to move through all the mental and emotional resistance that goes along with recognizing one's empty center. Because we're conditioned to think the opposite. I'm a somebody. I'm going to do a something, you know? And so I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but for me, that is the privilege of pursuing that line of question is in the resulting state of being that one attains in terms of experiencing the world. And Chinese martial arts are exactly that in a certain sense, meaning the whole metaphor, the whole idea of the story of transformation is fully tended to, meaning mind, body, and spirit. Just, I'm amazed at how clever these arts are. But it takes a huge effort to actually do them in the fullness of what they offer.
Yeah. What really resonated with me was also, because I had a kind of a realization like that for myself as well, that some people assume that, oh, you know, just practice martial arts and it's perfect physical therapy and emotional therapy and whatever. And I don't think it's that. But at the same time, it's very beneficial because it has this neurophysiological training that's in there. And when you then actually look at other, like maybe you have a specific, it can also be, I think, physical health. I realized this myself. I had a couple of issues, and it doesn't matter how much martial arts I train, those issues might not go away because that's not what the training system was specifically designed for. How could it? I mean, they didn't know what condition I specifically had.
That's right.
But when I then started looking at it, obviously all the training was super helpful, because I already had the ability to also, you know, access or kind of like be aware of certain parts of my body and what I'm doing there, and I can then correct it, and it was super helpful. And I found the same to be true for you know, the level of the mind or the emotions. It's the same, because the training is actually very helpful in terms of the skills that it gives you to kind of access yourself.
That's right. Yeah, I think the way I see it now is that you have to pursue mind, body, and spirit in the context of the whole, but you also have to meet each one on its own terms.
Yeah.
And so in art, you know, these arts are profound in that they're able to act as systems that can really create a context for the study of all those things. And yet it's useful to clarify further and meet each piece on its own. But the practice of having it in an overall space is just, it's so valuable, because when you're doing hard physical practice, emotion will come up, all these things. So you have a familiarity with the landscape, but then there may be a need to tend to just the body on a different level than you're going to find through your Gongfu practice, or the willingness to sit with hard feelings that you may just gloss over through the activity of, I did a lot of training hard to not feel my feelings. You know what I mean? So it's such a beautiful practice. My biggest complaint would be that people bring it down to their level too often, and so it loses its shine. Or really, what I mean is that it's a beautiful mystery, and it's something that we can really participate and be transformed by. But having the right attitude is really important, because it takes time. And, anything you persist at over a long period of time, you'll have your ups and downs. And there's a lot of wisdom to be gained in that. I mean, for me now, it's like looking at some of the ways that I got it wrong is painful, but so beneficial too, because, it's like you got to own all of your experience.
Yeah. Now, since you already mentioned the shine of the arts, the arts losing their shine, regarding maybe the greater martial arts community or communities, I guess there are more than there's more than one. Like, what would you hope for personally? Like, where should Chinese martial arts as a training method, as a culture, as a community, where should this go?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really know. I'd say I'm, in general, positive, because I know there's some really good Western practitioners out there now, and there wasn't when I first started this. I mean, there may have been, but they were fewer and further between, But I think there's some really good clarity, demonstrable, embodied by teachers of different traditions that are available now. So people that are serious can really actually get something, or at least study with somebody who's serious and has something to offer. It's still going to be hard. It's still going to take time and all the rest of it. I think the two biggest errors are, one, getting too fixated on fighting. And this is why I'm an advocate of, if that's a thing for you, go do it. Meet it, get it out of your system, know what it is. Because if you're studying Chinese martial arts and trying to be a fighter, you're in the wrong place. You know what I mean? It's like all these stupid videos of Tai Chi masters getting beaten up by MMA guys. Of course. You know what I mean? It's like, it's too stupid to even have it be a thing. Some 60-year-old guy that's doing park Tai Chi fighting some 27-year-old. I mean, come on. But so yeah, the fighting thing can get in the way, and it's useful for every man to know how to defend himself. So I think it's a good thing to look into. But Chinese martial arts is, first of all, Chinese martial arts are training systems. They're not fighting. That's what they are. They're training systems. And then if you wanted to fight, you would test it in that arena. Anyway, enough on that. But then the next thing is, it's harder than you think. And so a lot of people, especially that are interested in the more subtle spiritual aspects, they don't train hard enough, and they don't transform their body. The profound degree of release and relaxation that are the byproduct of this practice comes from hard work. It's like, Ajahn Chah said it beautifully: relax a little, you get a little peace. Relax a lot, you get a lot of peace. So like the smiling, the smiling tiger idea that is in this. This is how I think of my Xinyi teacher. He was a smiling tiger. He was always smiling, very sweet guy, but he was a bear. What are you going to do with him? He wasn't going to pick a fight, but nobody was going to look around a room and say, oh yeah, that's the guy I want to fight. So that whole phenomenon of being a smiling tiger is the, discipline gives us permission to manifest our greatness. It is the relaxation of somebody who's done the work. If you haven't done the work, you're not going to be relaxed around it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you know what? I think once the episode airs, everybody will start working really hard and change. I don't know, maybe not, but yeah, I can, I can totally understand where that's coming from, because I have made similar observations.
Yeah, and time,
but yeah, maybe,
too. The last thing I'd say is you have to be willing to work with somebody over a period of time if you're going to get their art.
Yeah. But I also agree with, more access to people who actually have knowledge and skill, and not just, kind of fantasize about martial arts. And I hope that, I really hope that also the podcast here can help a little bit, maybe also, connecting people, making this more accessible, and helping people understand what the practice is all about.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you're doing a great job to that end. And I think, what I hope, I guess, is that more people can rally around the commonalities and then appreciate the difference of how the arts get there. Because I look at Nabil, and I love his practice. I would love to play with him and learn from him, because I see so much of what's going on there as being something that I'm also doing, but it's different. The shapes are different, and so, I would love to see more people that are interested in the sort of beyond the form Shenfa body qualities that get developed, and exploring those. That's, to me, what's interesting. Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll meet again virtually for the second season, when because I'm thinking about maybe doing these more as group discussions, bringing together different people, and then maybe look at those commonalities and then talk about, but also the differences. Like you said, it can be quite interesting as well.
Yeah. No, I would love that. I mean, my personal goal is on putting forward a context where people can really explore meditation, healing, and movement in this space of finding that through line, which really, my little tagline is release the body, recognize the movement of mind, and rest in being. And this is really, whether you're doing that through training, doing that through sitting, doing that through Jinshin, it's all the same mindset.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. So for the first season, thank you for participating, and thank you for sharing all your experience and your insights. And we'll definitely keep in touch, and hopefully we'll meet again on the podcast.
Sounds good, Daniel. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was nice to be with you.
Thank you.
Take good care.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you had a great time. The next episode will air next month. And until then, feel free to check out our Instagram account, where we also feature some of the people we talk to, other practitioners and teachers of Chinese martial arts, and anything else that might be interesting in the world of Gongfu. Thanks, take care, and hope to meet again.